Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Endgame series. In this episode, we will be looking at different methods and techniques which are applied in winning or drawing rook versus pawn endgames. We will start with the tempo count technique, which is the simplest. To warm things up, let us dive right into it, by counting the number of moves that black needs. We see 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 5 tempi to control the promotion square with both the king and the rook. White needs 1, 2, 3, and 4. If it's black's move, then black wins in this manner. King to b4. King to g6. King to c5. Pawn to f6. Rook to f1. Pawn to f7. King to d6. King to g7. And white loses. If it were for white to move first, then the black's king would now be on d6 and black cannot stop promotion. This would end in a draw. Let us look at another variation with a different idea. King to b4. King to f6. White blocks his own pawn, but there is an idea behind this move. As we shall come to see later in this episode in shoulder charging, it is harder for black if both kings are on the same side of the pawn. This hinders the white king from working together with the rook. It's like cutting the coordination between the two pieces, an idea I will explain further in this episode. King to c5. King to e7, controlling the promotion square with the king. Rook to e1 check. King to d7. This prevents the black king from approaching any further. Rook to f1, attacking the pawn. King to e6, protecting the pawn. After king to c6, white is now completely lost. King to e5 is met with king to d7. Pawn to f6 is met with rook to e1 check. So, let's summarize what we have learned. 1. Tempo count is an important technique to use when no special circumstances alter the calculation. Even in these cases, take great care not to blunder. 2. It is very resourceful in blitz games. However, since these endings are practically complex, you will need to use other techniques, so let's move on to the next technique. Speaking of other techniques, let's see cutting off the king along a rank. When the side with the king and pawn has the king in the third rank and below, cutting off the king using the rook is the technique to use. This method wins straight away if it is a rook's pawn. Using the position below, let us see how this technique works. Rook to b4. This move cuts off the king and the pawn has to proceed alone without the king's protection. Pawn to h5. King to b2. The king approaches. Pawn to h6. This is the move black has been waiting for. The pawn is 2 moves away from the king, so the king cannot protect the pawn. Rook to b6, attacking the pawn. Pawn to h7. Rook to h6 wins the game for black. You may have asked yourself, what if white does not push the pawn further? After rook to b4. Pawn to h5. King to b2. White decides to move the king instead of the pawn. This only delays the inevitable. White hopes that black can block the king's cut off using his own king. But this fails due to the following sequence of moves. King to h3. King to c3. King to g3. King to d3. King to h3. Rook to f4. With this move, the king will not block the cut off as it approaches the pawn. King to g3. King to e4. Pawn to h6, and white loses in the same fashion as we saw. It is worth noting that black should not block the cut off with the king. Let us see an application of what we have just learned. In the following position, there is only one move that draws the game for white. I will give you 5 seconds so that you try to find the move using the technique we just learned. If 5 seconds is not enough time, pause the video. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The move is king to g4. The king moves to the 4th rank and cutting off the king is not decisive. It's a draw. Having learned that, we come into conclusion that if the king is in the 3rd rank or less, cutting off the king is a vital technique to consider. It may not be winning immediately but can buy some time for your king to approach. So, let's make some conclusions about this technique. 1. When the defender's king is on the 3rd rank or less, cutting off the king is a vital technique to consider. 2. For a rook's pawn and the king on the 3rd rank or less, cutting off wins straight away. That said, let's see other techniques to use when the king is past the 3rd rank. Let us check our third technique. Outflanking in rook versus pawn endgames. Let's get right into it. To understand outflanking in rook versus pawn endgames, we will first look at how white can survive this position. The first thing we notice in this position is that the king and the pawn are on the 5th rank. This means that cutting off the king will not work since the white king is far past the 3rd rank. Black will then have to push the white king from the rear. Rook to a5 check. King to f6. King to f4 attacking the pawn. Pawn to g6. Rook to a6 check. King to f7. King to f5. Pawn to g7. Now you can see the pattern. At this point, there are two variations which both lead to a draw. In the first, white can play king to f8. King to f6. At this point white should under-promote to a knight. Promoting to a queen leads to checkmate in one move. In the second variation, white can play king to g8. King to g6. King to h8. If black captures the pawn then it's stalemate. If the rook gives a check, then white promotes to a queen. As you have seen in the previous position, pushing from the rear does not work due to knight under promotion, unless it is a rook's pawn. We will talk about rook's pawn ideas in after this outflanking technique. Let us see how outflanking works using this position. The first thing to notice is that the king and pawn are in the 4th rank and not in the 5th rank as in the previous position. Rook to a4 check. King to e5. King to f3. This moves the attacks the pawn and it's the start of the king's journey to the opposite side of the pawn to white's king. It is better for black if the kings are on opposite sides of the pawn than when they are on the same side. This is the idea behind outflanking in this endgame. Pawn to f5. King to g4. The king continues with the journey. Pawn to f6. King to g5. The king has finally made it to the opposite side of the white king. Pawn to f7 threatening to promote. Rook to a8. Rook to e4 also gets the job done. The rest is straightforward. King to e6. King to g6. And white is now completely lost. Let's check our conclusions about this outflanking technique. 1. Pushing from the rear does not work for a non-rook's pawn, due to under-promotion to a knight. By non-rook's pawn I mean b, c, d, e, f and g pawns. 2. Outflanking is not possible if the pawn is on the 5th rank and above, unless the rook is behind the pawn. Let's check ideas about the rook's pawn. In many endgames, the rook's pawns seem to have their own principles and exceptions. This endgame is no different. Using this position, let us see how. Looking at the following position we notice a few things. Given that the king and the pawn are on the 5th rank and a rook's pawn, outflanking is not possible. Cutting off the king using the rook does not help too. So we will push the king from the rear. Rook to a5 check. King to g6. King to g4. Pawn to h6. Rook to a6 check. King to g7. King to g5. Pawn to h7. Rook to a7 check. King to g8. King to g6. As you know, a knight on the rim is dim. The knight in the corner is even worse. Since this is a rook's pawn, Under promotion to a knight is useless. Promotion to a queen leads to checkmate in one move. The position is lost for white. Promotion to a knight. King to f6 and the game is lost for white. Now, let us point out observations made using the rook's pawn. 1. Pushing the king from the rear is very effective against a rook's pawn, since under promotion to a knight is useless. 2. Pushing the king from the rear is useless against non-rook's pawns due to under promotion to a knight. 3. A knight on the rim is dim, and worst at the corner. Let us move on to stalemate themes in this endgame. The fact that under promoting to knight does not help in a rook's pawn does not mean that all rook's pawn positions are lost. This is due to stalemate themes the rook's pawn poses. Let us study the following position. No matter who is to play first, the game is a draw. Rook to g1 check. King to h8. Rook to h1. King to g7. Rook to g1 check. And neither sides can make progress. The position is drawn. Let us look at the last technique you should know. Shoulder charging. Another theme we are going to see in these endgames is the shoulder charge. This technique comes in handy if both kings are on the same side of the pawn. About that we are going to study about the following position. We notice a few things in this position. The first thing is that white king is ideally placed and controls the promotion square. Both kings are on the same side of the pawn, which favors white. Black's plan is to make the kings oppose and give a rear check which forces white's king either behind the pawn or block the pawn. This is the idea we are going to see. Rook to h7 check. A time-gaining check. This check dislodges the white king from the c7 square. King to c6. Rook to h1. This move prepares the rear check. In case white goes back to c7, then black delivers the rear check immediately forcing white to block the pawn. Pawn to d6. Rook to c1 check. This forces white king to go behind the pawn or block it, after which either of the moves is losing. Let's check out some guidelines about this technique. 1. When both kings are on the same side of the pawn, shoulder charging is the technique to use. 2. In shoulder charging, the idea is to give a rear check that forces the king at the front or the back of the pawn. This is done when the kings are opposed. 3. Only give checks if they can improve your position or gain some time. Let us conclude this episode with a study done about this endgame. In all the previous positions we have seen above, the rook is always able to stop the pawn from queening, and forcing it to under-promote or capture it if it queens. However, as always in the game of chess, there are exceptions. The following position is called the Barbie-Saavedra position. In this position, the rook is unable to stop the pawn from queening. Let us see how. Rook to f6 check. King to d5. King to d7 draws in the following way. By use of a skewer tactic, the rook is able to capture the queen. King to c5 also draws in the following way. By moving to the rear of the pawn, the rook is able to capture the queen. White king must therefore find a way to cross to the b file without allowing the rook come to the rear of the pawn. Rook to f5 check, king to d4, rook to f4 check, king to d3, rook to f3 check. King to c2. Finally, white king can cross the c-file without the rook coming to the rear of the pawn. The rest is straightforward and the pawn is able to queen. I really appreciate and thank you for watching this episode to the end. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I hope to see you in the next episode.